Jesus a Jew?
I mean, it sounds like a trick question, right?
Right. To almost anyone listening right now, the immediate instinct is to just say, well, yes, obviously.
Yeah, it feels like a settled fact.
Exactly. But, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today, the moment you start digging into the ancient linguistic landscape and, the history of translation, that seemingly solid fact just suddenly melts away.
It really does. We're looking at this massive academic battlefield today where the very terms we use to define historical figures are just being fiercely interrogated.
Yeah, and that's our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring how the labels we casually apply to historical figures might completely distort who they actually were.
Because the labels we confidently project backward onto history, they often tell us way more about our modern world than they do about the ancient one.
Right, which is fascinating. So, to do this, we are looking at two really compelling, highly contrasting sources today.
Two very different ways of looking at history.
Exactly. On one side, we have a deeply linguistic academic paper by John H. Eliot. This is from the Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus. And on the other side, we have a really sharp counter-perceptive by Jonathan Adler, which was published by Yale University Press.
And, for everyone listening, it's essential to recognize that this isn't just some exercise in academic pedantry.
Right, it's not just semantics.
No, not at all. It's about history, geography, and the real danger of projecting our modern world onto the ancient past. I mean, this debate dictates how we translate texts and how we understand the geopolitical dynamics of the first century.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the first argument presented by John H. Eliot, we basically have to completely let go of our modern dictionaries.
Yeah, you have to throw them out. Eliot makes a highly provocative claim here. He argues that Jesus was neither a Christian nor a Jew in the way we use those words today.
Which, feels totally counterintuitive to someone reading a modern translation of the New Testament. You see these words printed on the page, so you just assume the concepts were fully formed in the minds of the people living through those events.
But that's the illusion of retroactive translation. His core thesis really relies on understanding these massive cultural shifts that didn't happen until the 4th century.
The 4th century, so hundreds of years later.
Exactly. According to Eliot, and he draws heavily on scholars like Jacob Neusner here, the concepts of both Christianity and Judaism as distinct, recognized world religions, they simply did not exist during Jesus' lifetime.
Wait, really? Not at all.
No, they're much later developments. Take the word Christian, for example. It barely even appears in the New Testament.
Oh, wow. I think people assume it's everywhere in there.
Right, but it's only in there 3 times.
Yeah.
And more importantly, we have to look at why it was used. It wasn't some term of self-identification coined by Jesus' followers.
Like they weren't walking around calling themselves Christians.
Exactly. It was originally an outsider's mocking label. It was essentially a political slur coined by Latin-speaking authorities in Antioch to categorize a group they just saw as a nuisance.
Wow.
Yeah, it translates roughly to like Christ lackeys or partisans of Christ.
So it's basically a classic case of an empire assigning a label to a minority group just for administrative convenience.
Exactly. It took generations for the movement to actually reclaim and adopt that label for themselves.
It's like calling a 17th century pilgrim an American internet user or something.
Right.
The words might eventually connect to that geography, but the concept makes zero sense in their actual time. It creates this huge historical illusion for the listener.
It fundamentally alters the historical environment. And, Eliot applies that exact same parallel logic to the word Jew.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, the modern concept of a Jew, which was profoundly shaped centuries later by the compilation of the Mishnah, the Talmud, the establishment of rabbinic traditions, that whole framework would be entirely alien to Jesus.
Because all of that happened way after the 1st century.
Right. Scholars point out that early Judaism and early Christianity were basically like twins in the womb until they took their modern institutional shapes in the 4th century.
So, applying these 4th century terms to 1st century people just totally distorts the reality they were living in.
Exactly. When we drag our modern religious boundaries into ancient texts, we ignore the sociolinguistic rules of that specific era.
Right.
And Eliot's next major point really hinges on this dynamic. He focuses on the rigid distinction between insider and outsider language in the ancient Mediterranean.
Which makes sense because language is relational. The way you describe your identity to your own neighbors is totally different from how you describe it to a foreign government official.
That relational aspect is key here.
Right.
So Eliot points us to this crucial ancient Greek word, Iudaios.
Peudeos.
Yeah. In almost all modern English Bibles and historical texts, this word is translated directly as Jew. But Eliot argues this is a profound mistranslation.
Because it meant something else entirely to them.
Right. Linguistically and historically, Iudaios translates to Judean.
Judean, meaning someone from the territory of Judea.
Exactly. It's a geographic marker. It refers to someone who physically resides in or is ethnically associated with that specific territory. It's not a theological label.
Oh, wow. Okay, so do we have evidence of that?
We do. Eliot brings in this fascinating historical detail from Clearchus. He was a pupil of the Greek philosopher Aristotle.
Okay.
And Clearchus noted that outsiders, specifically the Syrians at the time, they called these people Iwudai strictly based on the district they inhabited.
So it was just the geographic lens that the rest of the world used to categorize them.
Precisely.
But wait, if that was the outsider label, what was the insider reality? Like, if Jesus wasn't identifying as a Judean, how did his own people actually see him?
Well, when speaking to each other, insiders almost never use that term.
Really? What did they use?
They use terminology rooted in their shared lineage. They identified themselves as Israelites or members of the House of Israel. Eliot's textual analysis shows incredible consistency here. When insiders speak to other insiders in these ancient texts, they use Israelite. When outsiders are speaking, the term Judean appears.
So it's kind of like how a local might call themselves a Brooklynite to their neighbors.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Like, that's their insider identity. But a European tourist looking at a map might just label them an American, which is the outsider label.
Right.
Both are technically true, but they serve completely different linguistic purposes.
Exactly. And the New Testament actually preserves this boundary vividly. You see it especially in the crucifixion accounts.
Okay, walk us through that. How does it show up there?
So look at the Roman outsiders, Pilate, and his soldiers. They exclusively use their outsider geographic terminology. They mock Jesus as the king of the Judeans, using that Greek word Iudaios.
Because they're looking through an imperial lens.
Right. But then, when the narrative shifts to the insider Israelite priests mocking him, the vocabulary changes entirely. They mock him as the would-be king of Israel.
Oh, wow. So the text itself keeps that linguistic firewall intact.
It really does. But this brings up a massive geographic complication for the whole Judean label.
Right, because Jesus wasn't actually from Judea.
Exactly. This is the geographic reality of first century Palestine. Jesus was a Galilean from Nazareth.
Not a Judean.
Right. Galilee was a distinct northern region, completely separated geographically and culturally from the southern region of Judea.
And in an ancient world, your regional identity isn't just trivia, it's everything.
It defines your whole social standing. And the New Testament constantly refers to him and his followers as Galileans or Nazarenes.
Wait, I'm trying to think. Isn't there a story where someone does call him a Judean, though?
Yes, there's one famous interaction at a well in Samaria. A Samaritan woman explicitly calls Jesus a Iudaios.
Okay, so doesn't that contradict Eliot's point?
You'd think so, but it actually proves it. The context of that passage is heavily focused on his travel route. He's journeying north, coming directly out of the territory of Judea.
Ah, I see.
She's an outsider, making a quick geographical assumption based purely on the fact that he was traveling from that direction.
So to her, he's just a guy coming from Judea. But within his own community, his identity was firmly rooted as a Galilean Israelite.
Exactly. Now, what's fascinating here is we also have to look at the word for the culture itself.
Like the concept of Judaism?
Yeah, the ancient term iudaismos. What's fascinating here is that even this word originally didn't mean a religion.
Really? What did it mean?
It was coined during the Maccabean period to describe a specific Judean way of life that was resisting Greek assimilation.
So it was more like a cultural resistance movement than a theology.
Exactly. Even Paul only uses it when talking to Gentiles about compelling them to live in a Judean fashion. It was about daily practices, not a world religion.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. I hear Eliot. I get the demand for historical precision.
Right.
But if Eliot is right, and translating Iudaios to Jew erases Jesus' Galilean identity, doesn't throwing the word Jew out entirely feel like we're erasing his heritage?
That is the exact pushback he gets.
I mean, aren't we just playing an academic semantic game that strips him of the identity claimed by his descendants?
And that brings us perfectly to Jonathan Adler's firm counterargument.
Okay, let's hear Adler's side.
While Eliot is looking at a microscopic snapshot of first century geography, Adler zooms way out. He looks at a sweeping 2,700-year timeline, and his thesis is unambiguous. Jesus absolutely was a Jew.
So how does Adler bridge that gap if the English word didn't exist back then?
He focuses on linguistic evolution. He points out that for 2,700 years, the ancestors of today's Jews identified as Yehudim.
Yehudim, the Hebrew term.
Right, and as language naturally evolved, Yehudim became the Greek iudaioi.
Okay.
Then when the Romans took over, that Greek term became the Latin eudagai.
And then Latin morphs into the early European languages.
Exactly. Through natural phonetic shifts, it becomes Old French Jew, Old English skis, and finally just Jews.
So Adler's saying Jew is quite literally just the modern English translation of Yehudi.
Exactly. He argues that saying Jews didn't exist back then just because they didn't speak modern English is, frankly, playing a modern language game. It's not an anachronism, it's just how language works.
That makes a lot of sense.
Adler actually has this incredible time machine scenario to prove his point.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. Let's hear it.
He says, imagine you travel back in time to the 1st century. You walk up to Jesus and ask him in English, are you a Jew?
Okay, what happens?
Well, according to Eliot's strict geographic logic, Jesus would supposedly say, no, I'm a Galilean Israelite.
Right.
But Adler says that's historically blind. Because in reality, Jesus would look at you and reply in Aramaic, I don't speak English, I'm a Yehudi.
Huh. Wow.
Right. The core self-understanding is identical. The only thing that changed is the syllables over a couple thousand years.
That is such a compelling point. So I have to ask you, who has the stronger point here?
Right.
The academic demanding microscopic historical precision, or the historian pointing out basic linguistic evolution?
Well, that's the thing. We have to look at why they're both fighting so hard for their perspectives. Because the stakes of these historical labels are incredibly high.
Right. It's not just a polite disagreement in a faculty lounge somewhere.
Not at all. Let's look at the dangers on both sides, impartially. On Eliot's side, he argues that translating Iudaeos as Jew has caused incalculable historical harm.
How so?
Because it allows modern readers to project 20th century anti-Semitism backward onto 1st century texts.
Wow.
Think about it. Throughout the texts, Jesus is fiercely critiquing other Israelites. If we understand that he's debating Judean authorities, we see it for what it is, an intramural family debate among Israelites.
Right, an internal critique.
But if translators universally render that word as the Jews, the context totally warps. Later readers misunderstand Jesus' critiques as anti-Jewish bigotry rather than an internal debate. Eliot argues this linguistic choice has literally fueled centuries of prejudice.
Wow. I mean, that is a staggering consequence of a translation choice. But what about the other side?
Conversely, Adler warns of the horrific dangers of stripping Jesus of his Jewishness.
What happens when you do that?
Bad actors fill the vacuum. Adler cites a really dark history here. Under the Third Reich, Nazi academics literally tried to rewrite history.
Really? How?
They systematically tried to claim that Jesus wasn't Jewish at all.
Ew.
They promoted this fabricated idea that he was a pure Aryan from Persia who had just migrated to Galilee.
Oh my god. Just completely severing him from his actual lineage to fit a political narrative.
Exactly. They weaponized his identity. So Adler's warning is that when we say Jews didn't exist back then, we are unintentionally providing ammunition for those who want to erase that cultural continuity entirely.
So what does this all mean? We started out looking for a simple yes or no answer to this question, but we end up uncovering how incredibly powerful labels are.
They really are. They define our reality.
They can clarify our connection to the past, like Adler shows, or they can be totally weaponized to rewrite it, like Eliot warns. Whether we choose to call Jesus a 1st century Israelite, a Galilean, or a Yehudi, those words carry heavy historical baggage.
They absolutely do. And it's something we have to be conscious of every time we read ancient history.
Well, thank you to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive. But before we go, do you have a final thought to leave the listeners with?
I do, actually. I want you to think about the labels you use to define your own identity today.
Oh, this is a fun exercise. Okay.
Right. Think about your nationality, your politics, your core beliefs. Now imagine a historian 2,000 years from now, trying to translate those exact words into a language that doesn't even exist yet.
That's wild to think about.
If they apply their future political frameworks to your life today, would you even recognize yourself in their history books?
Probably not. That is a brilliant point to end on. Keep questioning the words you read, everyone, and the histories you assume are just simple facts. Thanks for joining us.